Billionaire sees poor girl mowing the mansion's lawn. She says, "My little brother is sick. I need money for his medicine." He can't hold back the tears. The sound didn't belong there. Henry Sterling paused in the middle of the hallway, a cup of still hot coffee in his hands. It was Saturday morning, and Saturdays in the Willows gated community were sacred, as silent as an empty cathedral. For 15 years, ever since he bought the property, no sound had ever disturbed his mornings. Not the lawnmowers of distant neighbors, nor children playing, nothing. But there it was, a metallic, irregular noise coming from the garden. Henry walked to the living room window. What he saw made him frown. A girl, no older than 6 or 7, was crouched near his rose bushes, holding a pair of rusty garden shears. She was cutting the grass around the plants with clumsy, clearly inexperienced movements. "What the hell?" Henry muttered, placing the cup on the coffee table with more force than necessary. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to trespass on his property. The Willows was in one of the city's most affluent areas, but it still occasionally attracted beggars, salespeople, or people looking for work. Henry always dismissed them quickly. He paid a security company precisely to avoid these situations, but a child, and so young, this was new. Henry descended the marble staircase with firm steps. His expensive sneakers made no noise against the polished floor of the entrance hall. Everything in the house was like that, silent, perfect, controlled. The white walls, the minimalist furniture, the abstract paintings hung at precise distances. Not a single thing was out of place. He opened the main door and felt the cool morning air. The garden stretched out before him like a flawless green carpet, interrupted only by the tiny figure of the girl who continued to work, engrossed. "Hey!" Henry shouted, walking along the stone path. "What are you doing?" The girl looked up. She had messy brown hair tied in a crooked ponytail and was wearing a faded pink t-shirt that seemed too big for her. Her eyes were dark, large, but they held a strange seriousness for someone so young. "Mowing the lawn," she answered in a tiny voice, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Henry stopped a few feet away, his hands on his hips. The girl was even smaller than she had appeared from the window. It was hard to believe someone so little was there alone. "This is my property. You can't be here." The girl stood up, wiping her hands on her dirt-stained jeans. She didn't look scared or ashamed. In fact, there was a strange determination on her little face. "I know it's yours," she said. "But you weren't using this part, and it's a bit overgrown." "That doesn't matter. You need to leave now." Henry tried to sound firm, but there was something unsettling about scolding such a small child. "Can I finish first? There's just a little bit left." The girl's audacity left Henry momentarily speechless. He was used to being obeyed immediately. In business meetings, a single word from him could make executives tremble. But here was a 6-year-old child negotiating with him. "No," Henry said, regaining his composure. "You can't finish. You shouldn't have even started. This is private property." The girl sighed, as if she were the one dealing with a stubborn child. The sound was amusing, coming from someone so small. "Okay," she said, putting the shears into a small, worn-out backpack that had a butterfly sticker on it. "But you could have let me finish. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're trespassing on my property." "I'm helping it look prettier." Henry felt a vein throb in his temple. "Why are you doing this? Where are your parents? Do they know where you are?" The girl stopped packing her backpack and looked him directly in the eyes. There was something in her expression that Henry couldn't decipher. It wasn't defiance, nor fear. It was something deeper, sadder. "My brother's sick," she said, with a seriousness that definitely didn't match her age. "Time raising money for his medicine." The words hit Henry like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. The girl continued speaking, her voice low but steady. "Thomas needs medicine every day, or his fever won't go down. I thought if I mowed the lawns of the big houses, people might give me a few dollars." Henry felt something strange happening in his chest, a pressure, as if something were breaking inside. The girl stood there, with her old backpack and rusty shears, explaining why she had trespassed on his property, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And she was only 6. "Thomas is my little brother," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He's 5. He gets sick a lot. And the doctor said we need to buy the right medicine. The cheap ones don't work well." Henry blinked, and something warm ran down his face. Tears. He was crying. When was the last time that had happened? He couldn't remember. "What's your name?" Henry asked, his voice softer now. "Alice. Alice Miller." "How old are you, Alice?" 6. I'll be 7 next month." Henry swallowed hard. 6 years old, and she was here, trying to earn money to buy medicine for her sick brother, with old shears and a determination that most adults he knew didn't possess. "Where do you live?" Alice pointed beyond the property walls, toward what Henry knew to be one of the city's poorer neighborhoods. "On Blossom Street, house number 47. It's the small blue one with the broken fence." Henry knew the area. He had driven past it a few times on his way to the office. Small houses, poorly maintained streets, old cars parked on the sidewalks. He had never really paid attention, but now the images came back to his mind with painful clarity. "Show me," Henry said. Alice frowned. "What?" "Your house. Show me where you live." "Why?" she asked with the natural curiosity of a 6-year-old. Henry hesitated. He didn't know why himself. Something in that conversation had changed something inside him, something he didn't fully understand. "I want to meet your brother," he said finally. Alice studied Henry's face for a long moment, biting her lower lip as children do when they're thinking. "Okay," she said eventually, "but you can't scare Thomas. He gets nervous around people he doesn't know." The walk to Alice's house took only 15 minutes, but for Henry, it was like entering a completely different world. The girl walked beside him with small, quick steps, chattering nervously about random things, like how she learned to use the shears, how she knew Saturday was the best day to mow lawns because people were home. They left the affluent area of the gated community and entered a neighborhood where the houses were small and close together. Some had well-kept gardens, others were clearly neglected. Children played in the streets, and adults chatted on their porches. Henry had never been here before. Even driving by, he had never really seen it. House number 47 was exactly as Alice had described. Small, tiny, faded blue house with a wooden fence that was half fallen. The front yard had more dirt than grass, and there were toys scattered on the porch, a doll with no hair, a few broken cars. "This is it," Alice said, opening the gate, which creaked loudly. Henry followed her up the path to the front door. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows had a cracked pane that someone had fixed with duct tape. Alice opened the door without a key. "Thomas," she called in her tiny voice, "I'm home." The inside of the house was even more striking than the outside, not for its beauty, but for the raw reality that Henry had never witnessed up close. The living room was tiny, with an old sofa that had patches on the cushions and a small television on top of a wooden crate. The floor was worn tile, and the walls had damp stains in some places, but there was something more. There was life there. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a colorful blanket thrown over the sofa, storybooks stacked on a small table. It was messy, yes, but there was a warmth that Henry's mansion, with all its perfection, had never possessed. "Thomas," Alice called again, walking toward a narrow hallway. A voice even tinier than hers answered from one of the rooms. "I'm here, Alice." Henry followed Alice down the hall to a small room where a child was lying in a twin bed. The boy had messy blonde hair, but his skin was pale and sweaty. Even from a distance, Henry could see he had a fever. "This is Thomas," Alice said, sitting on the edge of the bed and placing her small hand on her brother's forehead. "Thomas, this is... What's your name again?" "Henry," he answered, feeling strangely out of place in that small room. Thomas looked at Henry with big, curious eyes, just as large as his sister's. "Are you Alice's friend?" Henry didn't know what to say. Was he? They had met less than an hour ago, and it had started with him trying to kick her off his property. "He is," Alice answered for him, with the simple confidence of a child. "He came to see how you are." Thomas smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "I'm better today. Yesterday I couldn't even play." Henry felt his chest tighten. This child was clearly sick, yet he was trying to seem strong for his sister. "Where's Mom?" Alice asked. "She went to work." Said she won't be back till late. Alice nodded as if this were normal, and Henry realized it probably was. Mom cleans offices at night, Alice explained to Henry simply. Henry watched the scene. Alice, just 6 years old, taking care of her sick brother, shouldering responsibilities no child should have, Thomas trying to be brave despite being clearly in pain, her mother working night shifts to try to pay the bills. "What medicine does he need?" Henry asked. Alice went to an old dresser and picked up a crumpled prescription. She had to stretch on her tiptoes to reach it. "This one, but it costs $150, and we can only afford a similar one that costs $30. The doctor said the cheap one doesn't work well." Henry took the paper and read it. It was a common antibiotic, nothing particularly expensive for someone with his wealth. $150. He spent more than that on a single meal. "Let's go to the pharmacy," Henry said. "What?" Alice asked, her eyes wide. "We're going to buy the medicine." "Now," Alice shook her little head, "I don't have enough money. I only made $5 mowing your lawn." "I'll pay." The silence in the room was total. Alice stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "Why?" she asked with the raw honesty of a 6-year-old. Henry looked at Thomas, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes, then at Alice, who was staring at him with a mixture of hope and confusion. "Because it's the right thing to do," Henry answered, and for the first time in years, he felt he was speaking an absolute truth. The pharmacy was just 2 blocks from the house. Henry took Alice's small, warm hand to cross the streets, a gesture he made automatically and which surprised him. Alice didn't let go of his hand once during the walk. At the pharmacy, Henry paid for the medicine without hesitation and also bought a few extra things the pharmacist recommended. Children's vitamins, a better thermometer, and a strawberry-flavored cough syrup. "That's a lot of money," Alice whispered, looking at the bags. "No, it's not," Henry replied, and realized that for him, it really wasn't. When they returned, Thomas was already asleep. Alice gave him the first dose of the medicine with the care of an experienced nurse, and Henry watched her tend to her brother with a tenderness that left him speechless. "Tysis, thank you," Alice said when they left the room, her voice low so as not to wake Thomas. "You're welcome. Why did you do that?" The simple question caught him off guard. Why had he done it? Henry Sterling was not known for altruistic gestures. He had built an empire based on cold ash and calculated decisions. He did nothing without expecting something in return. But there, in that small damp house, watching those 2 children care for each other, a 6-year-old acting like an adult, something had broken inside him. Something that had been locked away for so long he had forgotten it existed. "I don't know," Henry admitted. Alice smiled, the first true smile he had seen from her. "That's okay. Sometimes we do good things without knowing why." Henry left the Miller house with a strange feeling in his chest. The sun was setting, and he drove back to the Willows in silence, trying to process what had happened. When he got home, the mansion seemed different. It was still perfectly clean and organized, but now the silence wasn't comforting, it was oppressive. Henry walked through the empty hallways, up the marble stairs, and sat in his living room looking out the window at the garden where it all began. For the first time in his life, Henry Sterling had done something without calculating the return. He had helped someone simply because it was the right thing to do, and the feeling was both liberating and terrifying. He didn't know what this meant for him, or what he would do next, but he knew something fundamental had changed. The 6-year-old girl, with her rusty shears and fierce determination, had accomplished what years of therapy and self-help had not. She had broken through the armor Henry had built around his heart. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Henry Sterling didn't feel completely alone. Henry was in his office when he heard the doorbell. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, and he was working from home, reviewing quarterly reports. The sound made him look up from his papers, frowning. No one ever rang his doorbell. Deliveries were left at the gate, and visitors were always scheduled. Henry went downstairs wondering if it was a persistent salesperson. When he opened the door, he found Alice standing on the step, holding an old cookie tin with both her small hands. "Hi," she said, smiling in a shy way that Henry hadn't seen before. "Alice." Henry looked over her head, searching for an adult. "Are you alone?" "I am," Thomas is feeling better, so he's with the neighbor. Alice lifted the tin with an effort. I brought you something. Henry looked at the tin. It was old, with peeling paint, and had a unicorn sticker on the lid. What is it? Cookies. Mom made them last night. Alice held the tin out to him. She said it's what we have to say thank you. Henry took the tin, feeling its weight. It was warm, as if the cookies were still fresh. You didn't have to. Yes, we did. Alice shook her head firmly. You helped us. Mom said you always have to say thank you when someone is kind. Henry stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. When was the last time someone had done something for him without wanting anything in return? He couldn't remember. Do you want to come in? Henry asked. Alice hesitated, biting her lower lip. How can I really? Of course. She followed him into the house, walking slowly and looking around with wide eyes. Henry noticed how she tiptoed, as if afraid to make a sound. Your house is really big, she said, her tiny voice echoing in the hall. It is. Do you really live here all by yourself? I do. Alice stopped in the middle of the living room, spinning slowly to take it all in. It must be very quiet. Henry had never thought of it that way. For him, silence had always been comfort. But seeing it through the eyes of a 6-year-old, he began to understand that maybe it was something else. Want to eat the cookies in the garden? Henry asked. Alice's little face lit up. Can I? They went out through the back door. The garden was perfect as always, with the grass cut in straight lines and the flowers arranged by color. Henry took 2 patio chairs and placed them in the shade of a large tree. Alice climbed into the chair with some difficulty, her little legs dangling, not reaching the ground. She opened the tin, and the sweet smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the air. They were small and a bit lopsided, clearly handmade. Mom doesn't make cookies often, Alice said, offering the tin to Henry. But she wanted to make them nice. Henry took a cookie and bit into it. It was too sweet and a little burnt on the edges, but there was something about it that made Henry smile. It's good, he said. And it was true. Alice took a cookie for herself and settled into the chair, kicking her feet in the air. Thomas is much better, she said. He even played a little yesterday. It's been a while since he's done that. That's good. Mom was happy when I told her you paid for the medicine. Henry stopped chewing. She was. She said you're a good person. Alice looked at the cookie in her small hands, and that there are good people in the world. Henry felt that familiar pressure in his chest. Girls, and what else did she say? That I could come here to say thank you, but only if you let me. Alice took a small bite of her cookie. Do you let me? Of course. They sat in silence for a moment, eating the lopsided cookies and listening to the birds in the garden. Henry watched Alice swing her legs and wondered when was the last time he had seen a child just be a child. Can I tell you something? Alice asked suddenly. You can. Alice looked around as if to make sure no one else was listening. My dad left when Thomas was born, she said, her voice low. Henry felt a lump form in his throat. He did? Yeah. He didn't want 2 kids. Said it was already hard with just me. Alice spoke as if she were telling any other story, but Henry saw how her fingers squeezed the cookie. Mum was sad for a while. Henry didn't know what to say. How could a 6-year-old talk about abandonment so matter-of-factly? But it's okay now, Alice continued quickly, as if she had seen the expression on his face. We don't need him. And your mum? How does she manage to take care of you? She works as a cleaner, cleans houses and offices. Alice shrugged. Sometimes she comes home really tired, but she always asks how our day was. Henry imagined a woman coming home after cleaning offices all night, still having the energy to care for 2 small children. The image made the lump in his throat grow bigger. And do you go to school? Henry asked, although something in Alice's behavior had already suggested the answer. Alice shook her head. Not anymore. Thomas gets sick a lot, and someone needs to take care of him when Mom's at work. The words hit Henry like a punch. Since when? Since last year. When Thomas started getting sick all the time. Alice spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I can read a little, so it's okay. Henry remembered how he had found her mowing the lawn, a 6-year-old taking on adult responsibilities, and now he discovered she had dropped out of school to care for her sick brother. "Do you miss school?" Henry asked, his voice coming out lower than he intended. Alice thought for a moment, swinging her legs. "Sometimes. I like to draw, and there was a teacher who read really beautiful stories." Henry pictured Alice at school, sitting at a small desk with other children, raising her little hand to ask questions, running around during recess. The image made the lump in his throat even bigger. "But that's just how it is," Alice continued, as if she had read his thoughts. "Family takes care of family." Henry looked at the girl beside him, 6 years old, and already talking about sacrifice and responsibility like an adult. He thought of his own childhood, how his parents were always traveling, how he had grown up practically alone with nannies and private tutors. He had had everything money could buy, but he had never had what Alice had, someone who cared enough to sacrifice everything for him. "Your mom must be proud of you," Henry said. Alice smiled, and this time it was a true smile that lit up her whole face. "She says I'm brave, but I think she's the brave one, taking care of us alone." Henry watched Alice talk about her mother, saw how her eyes sparkled with admiration. When was the last time he had felt something like that for someone? When was the last time someone had spoken of him that way? "But what about you?" Alice asked suddenly, looking at him with those big, curious eyes. "Your family?" Henry hesitated. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that he had grown up in a family where love was something negotiable, that his parents saw him more as an investment than a son? "I don't have a family," Henry said simply. "So everyone has a family," Alice said with the strange wisdom of children. "Sometimes they just don't live together." "Mine doesn't exist anymore." Alice studied him with those serious eyes, too old for her age. "Is that why you're alone in this big house?" Henry nodded, not trusting his own voice. "Oh, that must be sad," Alice said, and there was genuine compassion in her tiny voice. They sat in silence for a while, eating the lopsided, overly sweet cookies from Clara Miller. Henry looked at Alice and saw a child who had lost her childhood to care for her family. Alice looked at Henry and saw a man who had lost his family to get everything else. "Can I come back another day?" Alice asked when she finished her cookie. "Of course," Henry replied, and was surprised by the quickness of his answer. "Promise you won't get tired of me. Thomas says I talk too much sometimes." Henry looked at this brave 6-year-old girl with her homemade cookies and her stories of sacrifice and love, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, the desire for someone to come back. "I promise," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Henry Sterling made a promise he intended to keep. "Okay." Alice jumped down from the chair and closed the cookie tin. "I'll leave the rest of the cookies with you. Mum said good food is meant to be shared." Henry took the tin, feeling its weight and warmth. It was the first time in years someone had cooked especially for him. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." Alice smiled and waved. "But by Henry." Henry watched her walk out of the garden, a small figure with determined steps, heading back to her life of impossible responsibilities. And for the first time since he could remember, Henry Sterling didn't want the silence to return. The following Thursday, Henry was working when he heard the doorbell. This time he didn't hesitate. He knew who it was. Alice was on the step with a crumpled piece of paper in her hand and a shy smile on her face. "I made a drawing for you," she said, holding out the paper. Henry took the drawing and studied it. It was a big house with many windows, and in front stood 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. At the top of the page, written in crooked letters, was Henry and Alice. "That's us," Alice explained, standing on her tiptoes to point. "You're the big one, and I'm the little one." Henry felt something warm spread through his chest. "It's beautiful. Can I come in?" "You always can." And so it began. Alice would show up 3, sometimes 4 times a week, always with something in her hands, a new drawing, a flower she had found on the way, or just her own empty hands and a story to tell. Henry discovered she had an impossible imagination for a 6-year-old. She told stories about princesses who lived in castles made of clouds, about cats that could fly, about trees that grew chocolates instead of fruit. "And then the dragon found out he wasn't mean," Alice said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. He was just missing his dragon mommy. "And what happened next?" Henry asked. He was sitting in his armchair, a forgotten report in his lap. The princess helped him find his mommy and they became friends. Alice smiled. Everyone needs friends. Henry treasured every word. He found that he liked hearing Alice's tiny voice filling the empty hallways of his house. It was as if she brought color to a place that had always been grey. The drawings started to pile up. Henry pinned them to the kitchen refrigerator, something he never imagined he would do. There were drawings of colorful butterflies, of houses with hearts on the door, of smiling stick-figure families, always with crooked letters writing things like, "For Henry," or "Friends Forever." "Why do you draw so much?" Henry asked one day. Alice was lying on the floor, coloring a new picture with crayons Henry had bought for her. "Because when I draw, I can make things the way I want them," she answered without looking up. "In the drawing, everyone is happy." Henry watched her color a family of 3 in front of a house. They were all smiling. The weeks passed. Henry noticed he started looking at the clock more often during the day. At 10 in the morning, he would wonder if Alice would come. At noon, if she hadn't appeared, he felt a strange emptiness. On a Tuesday, Alice didn't show up. Henry worked in his office, but he found himself going to the window every half hour to look at the garden. Nothing. On Wednesday, the same thing. On Thursday, when the doorbell finally rang, Henry nearly ran to open the door. "Hi," Alice said, looking a little tired. "Sorry I didn't come. Thomas was feeling a bit sick again and I had to stay with him." "Is everything okay now?" Henry asked, and was surprised by the genuine concern in his own voice. "It is. He just had a tummy ache. It's gone now." Alice walked into the house as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I missed you." Henry stopped. "You did?" "I did. You're my friend." Alice looked at him with those big, serious eyes. "Friends miss each other." Henry swallowed hard. "I missed you too." It was the first time he had admitted it, even to himself. The smile that lit up Alice's face was like sunshine entering a dark house. "Good. I brought a new story for you." They sat in the living room, and Alice began to tell a story about a boy who lived in a very tall tower and felt lonely. Henry listened to every word, noticing similarities that Alice probably didn't even see. "And then a little bird came," Alice continued, gesturing with her hands. She wasn't afraid of heights. "She flew to the boy's window every day. And what happened? The boy discovered he wasn't lonely anymore. The little bird brought music to the silent tower." Alice smiled. "And they became a family." Henry felt his chest tighten. "A family? Yeah. Family isn't just who you're born with. It's who stays with you." Alice said this with the strange wisdom of small children. It's who cares. That night, after Alice had left, Henry walked through the house. It no longer seemed so silent. He could hear echoes of Alice's laughter in the hallways. Imagine her little footsteps on the marble stairs. He looked at the drawings on the refrigerator. At the armchair where Alice always sat to tell her stories. At the crayons scattered on the coffee table. For the first time in 15 years, his house showed signs of life. And for the first time in much longer, Henry Sterling had someone to wait for. He didn't know when it had happened. He didn't know the exact moment when a 6-year-old girl with impossible stories and crooked drawings had become the most important part of his days. But he knew he didn't want to live without it anymore. Without her. On Friday, when Alice appeared at the door with a new drawing, a tall tower with 2 figures in the window, one big and one small, Henry understood that his life had changed forever. "It's our story," Alice explained. "The boy in the tower and the little bird." Henry looked at the drawing and saw the simple truth that a 6-year-old had managed to capture. He was no longer alone, and he never wanted to be again. Henry was in the garden on a Friday afternoon when he realized he knew almost nothing about the real lives of Alice and Thomas. They came to his house, told stories, made drawings, but what was their daily routine like? How did Clara manage to take care of everything on her own? The question bothered him for the rest of the day. During his solitary dinner, he thought of the small table he had briefly seen on his first visit. During his shower, he thought of the tiny bathroom he had glimpsed. In his king-size bed, He thought of the two twin beds squeezed into a small room. On Saturday morning, Henry made an impulsive decision. He was going to visit the Millers, not to solve an emergency this time, but simply because he wanted to better understand how they lived. 20 minutes later, he was standing in front of the faded blue house on Blossom Street, holding a bag of fruit he had bought on the way. It wasn't much, just an excuse to show up unannounced. Thomas was the one who answered the door, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Henry!" he shouted, jumping up and down. "You came?" The sound attracted Alison, who came running from the back of the house. "What are you doing here?" she asked, but she was smiling. "I brought some fruit for you," Henry said, lifting the bag, "and I wanted to see how you are." "Come in," Thomas said, pulling Henry by the hand. "So come see our house." This time, Henry paid real attention to the details, the tiny living room with the patched-up sofa, but there was a colorful blanket thrown over it that made everything cozier. The coffee table was an overturned wooden crate, but it was carefully organized with stacked children's storybooks. The walls were covered in drawings, not just from Alice, but from Thomas too. There were photos taped up, the three of them together at the park, Clara teaching Thomas to tie his shoe, Alice sleeping while hugging an old teddy bear. It was an improvised gallery of happy moments. "This is our living room," Thomas said, as if presenting a palace. "Mom always sits here with us before we go to sleep." Henry looked around. There was no big screen TV, no leather sofas, no expensive paintings. But there was something his mansion never had, real life embedded in the walls, in the crooked photos, in the toys lovingly scattered on the floor. "And this is the kitchen," Alice said, leading Henry to the next room. The kitchen was even smaller than the living room. A small, noisy refrigerator, a two-burner stove, a sink with a dripping faucet. But the small table had 4 chairs, one for each member of the family that no longer existed, and an extra one for visitors who rarely came. "Mom makes pancakes here every Sunday," Alice explained. "Say it's our special day." "Pancakes are my favorite food in the whole wide world," Thomas added seriously. Henry imagined Clara early in the morning in a cramped kitchen, flipping pancakes while 2 small children watched eagerly at the table. The image made something stir in his chest, a pang of something that took a moment to recognize as envy. "Want to see our room?" Thomas asked. The children's room was the size of Henry's closet, 2 twin beds against the walls, an old dresser, and almost no room to walk. But every inch was used with care. The walls were covered in drawings, toys were organized in boxes on the floor, books were stacked on the headboards. "I sleep in this bed," Alice said, sitting on the one on the right, "and Thomas in this one. Sometimes, when he has a nightmare, he comes to sleep with me." "Only sometimes," Thomas protested, but he was smiling. Henry looked at the tiny room and thought of the 5 empty bedrooms in his mansion. There was something profoundly wrong with that. "So let's play," Thomas asked, already pulling out a box of toys. They sat on the living room floor, and Henry found himself playing with dolls with 2 small children. Thomas arranged a family of plastic figures at an imaginary tea party. "You can be the daddy," Thomas said, handing a doll to Henry. Henry took the doll, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest. "I don't know how to play daddy." "It's easy," Alice said with the wisdom of a 6-year-old. "You just have to take care of the family and make everyone happy." They played for over an hour. Henry discovered he was good at making funny voices for the dolls, and that laughing with 2 children was infinitely better than any business meeting he had ever attended. The sound of a key in the door interrupted them. "Mommy!" Thomas shouted, dropping the toys and running to the entrance. Henry stood up, suddenly nervous. Clara Miller entered the room, and Henry saw her properly for the first time. She was young, no older than 28, but there was a deep weariness in her eyes. She wore a cleaning uniform and carried an old bag over her shoulder. But when she saw her children, her face transformed with a genuine smile that erased all the fatigue. "My loves," she said, bending down to hug Thomas and then Alice. "How was your day?" "Mom, Henry came to visit us," Alice announced. "He brought fruit and played house with us." Clara looked up and saw Henry standing there, still holding a plastic doll. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Mr. Sterling," Clara said finally, her voice low but respectful, "I didn't know you were here." "Henry," he corrected. Just Henry and I wanted to get a better sense of where you live. Clara studied his face for a moment, as if trying to understand his intentions. I hope you don't mind, Henry added quickly. I brought some fruit. The smile that appeared on Clara's face was small but sincere. Thank you. And of course I don't mind. It's nice to have a visitor. Mom, he does funny voices for the dolls, Thomas announced. Clara laughed, a beautiful sound that filled the small room. Really? And he's learning to be a pretend daddy, Alice added. Henry saw Clara blink quickly, as if holding back tears. How about I make a snack for everyone? Clara asked, changing the subject. You don't have to bother, Henry said quickly. It's no bother. You must be hungry after playing so much. Henry followed Clara to the kitchen and watched her open the refrigerator. She studied the contents carefully. A few eggs, a little milk, leftovers in small containers. I can make scrambled eggs, Clara said, more to herself. Henry felt his chest tighten. She was offering to share the little food she had with a man who could buy the entire supermarket without feeling a difference in his bank account. Actually, Henry said carefully, I was thinking, maybe I could run out and buy a few things for everyone's snack. Clara stopped, her hand on the refrigerator door. You don't have to... Henry, he corrected again. Das, and I'd like to... If you'll let me. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Why? The simple question caught him completely off guard. Why? Because he saw an exhausted mother trying to do her best with almost nothing. Because he saw two children who deserved more than leftovers from the fridge. Because you welcomed me into your home, Henry said finally. And I'd like to return the favor. The smile that appeared on Clara's face was cautious, but genuine. Okay, but nothing too expensive. We don't want... I know, Henry said gently. Henry returned 40 minutes later with grocery bags. He had been careful. Fresh fruit, bread, milk, cheese, a few simple but nutritious things. Nothing that looked like charity, just good food to share. When he opened the bags on the kitchen table, he saw Thomas and Alice's eyes widen. Look, apples, Thomas exclaimed, as if he had discovered treasure. And grapes, Alice added, picking up a bunch and examining it carefully. Clara watched in silence, biting her lower lip. It's too much, she said finally, her voice low. No, it's not, Alice replied before Henry could speak. We don't need much, just someone who remembers us. The 6-year-old's simple words hit Henry like a punch to the gut. He looked at Clara, who had tears shining in her eyes. That's right, Henry said softly. I just want to remember you. They made simple sandwiches and squeezed around the small kitchen table. Henry had never had a more delicious meal. It wasn't the food, it was what surrounded it. It was Thomas telling bad jokes that made everyone laugh until their stomachs hurt. It was Alice dividing her apple into small pieces for everyone to try. It was Clara asking about Henry's work with genuine interest, as if he were an old friend. It was family. Henry looked around the small table and felt something he had never experienced. He had grown up in a mansion 3 times the size of the miller's entire house, but he had never felt this warmth. His parents had given him everything money could buy, expensive schools, designer clothes, trips abroad. But they had never given him what Clara gave her children every day. Full presence, unconditional affection, the feeling of being the center of someone's world. Here in this cramped kitchen, with second-hand furniture and a dripping faucet, there was more real wealth than in all his investments combined. When Henry finally got up to leave, it was already dark outside. Thank you, Clara said at the door, her voice sincere. Not just for the food, for playing with them, for treating us like... Like what? Henry asked. Like family. Thomas and Alice hugged him tightly before he left, and Henry felt like he was leaving a part of himself in that small house. Will you come back? Alice asked. If you'll have me. Of course we'll have you, Thomas said. You're our friend. On the way back home, Henry thought about the stark difference between the 2 residences. His enormous and silent, full of expensive objects and completely empty of life. And the miller's, tiny and noisy, with almost nothing of material value but overflowing with true love. When he got home, Henry walked through the empty hallways and understood something fundamental. For the first time in his life, he had helped someone not because it was strategically smart, not because it would increase his fortune or reputation. He had helped because it was the human thing to do, because on the other side were other human beings who mattered. That's how it should have always been. That's how he wanted it to be from now on, with pure and simple humanity. And for the first time in a long time, Henry Sterling felt truly rich. It was a Thursday late in the afternoon when the doorbell rang. Henry was in his office reviewing contracts, but he immediately dropped everything. He already knew who it was. Only one person rang his doorbell with that frequency. When he opened the door, he found Alice alone on the step. She was wearing a little yellow dress that had seen better days, and she was clutching a rag doll to her chest. "Hi," she said, smiling a little shyly. "Hi, Alice. Where's Thomas?" "He stayed home with the neighbor. She's teaching him how to make animals out of modeling clay." Alice rocked on her heels. "Can I come in?" "You always can." Alice entered the house, but this time she didn't stop to admire the hall or the living room. She walked directly to the back door. "Can we stay in the garden?" she asked. "It's really nice out there." Henry followed her. The afternoon sun was golden, casting long shadows on the perfect lawn. Alice sat on the grass, near the roses, and placed the doll beside her. Henry hesitated for a moment. He never sat on the garden floor, but ended up joining her. "Do you want me to get you some juice?" Henry asked. "That would be nice." Henry returned with 2 glasses of orange juice. Alice accepted hers with both hands and took a small sip. "It's yummy," she said. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the afternoon. Henry watched Alice adjust the doll so it could also see the garden. It was such a naturally maternal gesture that it made him smile. "Does your doll have a name?" Henry asked. "She does. It's Rosie." Alice smoothed the doll's yarn hair. "Mom made her for me when I was little." "You're still little," Alice laughed. "Not that little. Now I take care of Thomas and help Mom." She spoke as if it were completely normal. "Rosie helps me not be scared when it's dark." Henry felt that familiar pang in his chest. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to be brave in the dark. She should be able to be a child, to be afraid, to know that there would always be someone nearby to comfort her. "What are you afraid of in the dark?" Henry asked gently. Alice thought for a moment, swirling the juice in her glass. "Sometimes I'm scared that something will happen to Mum when she's at work. Or that Thomas will get sick again and I won't know what to do." The raw sincerity of the answer left Henry speechless. Alice carried worries that adults struggled to handle, and she was only 6. "But Rosie reminds me that I'm strong," Alice continued, hugging the doll, "and that Mom always comes home." They returned to a comfortable silence. A gentle breeze swayed the flowers, and a few birds sang in the trees. Henry watched Alice look around the garden, then at the huge house behind them. Her eyes scanned the enormous windows, the white columns, the vastness of the property. Henry saw her mentally count the rooms she could identify from the windows. "Henry," Alice said finally, her voice low and curious. She turned to look at him directly, with those big, serious eyes. "Why do you live in such a big house all alone?" The simple question hit him like a gunshot. Henry opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How had a 6-year-old managed to ask the question he had been avoiding for years? Alice waited patiently, playing with the petals of a rose that had fallen on the ground. There was no judgment in her question, just genuine curiosity and perhaps a little bit of concern. Henry looked at the house around them, the huge windows reflecting the setting sun, the empty hallways he could imagine through the walls, the rooms that were never used, the dining room where he never received guests, the gourmet kitchen where he rarely cooked. "Because I always worked too much," Henry said finally, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "And I forgot to live." The words hung in the air between them. Henry was surprised by his own honesty. He had never admitted this even to himself, let alone to someone else. Alice absorbed the answer in silence, nodding as if it made perfect sense. "It's sad to live alone," she said simply. "It is," Henry agreed. and it was the first time he had admitted it out loud. "But you're not alone anymore," Alice said, smiling. "Oh, you have me and Thomas and Mom." Henry felt his chest tighten. "I do. Of course, we're your friends." Alice spoke with the absolute certainty of small children. Friends don't let friends be alone. They finished their juice as the sun set. Alice told a few stories about Rosie, how she had saved a family of lost ants, how she could fly when no one was looking. Henry listened to every word, but part of his mind was still processing the question and his own answer. When it was time for Alice to go home, Henry walked her to the gate. "Thanks for the juice," she said, quickly hugging his legs. "Thanks for the company. Bye, Henry, bye, Big House." Henry watched her walk down the street until she disappeared around the corner. Then he returned to the garden and sat in the same spot where they had been together. The grass was still flattened where Alice had sat, and there were a few rose petals scattered where she had played. "Why do you live in such a big house, all alone?" The question echoed in his mind. Henry looked at the house, his achievement, his symbol of success, his refuge from the world. But for the first time, he saw it through the eyes of a 6-year-old who shared a tiny room with her brother and thought it was perfectly normal. How many bedrooms were there? 8, 10. And how many did he actually use? His bedroom, the office, sometimes the kitchen. The rest was just empty space, echoing with the sound of his own footsteps. "Because I always worked too much and I forgot to live." His own words came back to haunt him. When was the last time he had truly lived? Not just existed, working and accumulating money, but truly lived. He couldn't remember. Henry remained in the garden until it was completely dark, thinking about Alice's question, about the sincerity in his own eyes when he answered, about the way she had accepted his answer without judgment. The next morning, Henry drove to the office, as he had every Monday for 15 years. The Sterling Group occupied 3 floors of a glass building in the city center. It was his creation, his legacy, his greatest achievement. The doorman greeted him with a polite but distant nod. Henry returned it in the same way as he always did. He got into the elevator alone, as always, and went up to the 12th floor. The doors opened to reveal the perfectly organized office. Desks aligned, computers on tires, employees already working even though it was only 8 in the morning. Henry walked down the main hallway toward his office. As always, employees would nod slightly or murmur, "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," as he passed. As always, he would respond with brief nods and keep walking. But this time, something different happened. For the first time, Henry really paid attention. People moved away when they saw him approaching. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Smiles vanished from faces. It was as if a storm cloud was passing through the office. Henry stopped in the middle of the hallway and looked around, really looked. He saw how people avoided eye contact, how they hunched over their desks when he passed, how the entire atmosphere became tense with his presence. When was the last time he had seen someone smile spontaneously in the office? When was the last time he had participated in a casual conversation with an employee? He couldn't remember. Henry reached his office, a huge room with a panoramic view of the city, expensive furniture, trophies and certificates hanging on the walls. He sat in the leather chair behind the mahogany desk and looked through the glass walls at the rest of the office. His employees worked in silence. There were no laughs, no lively conversations, no sign that these people enjoyed being there. It was efficient, yes, productive, certainly, but it was completely devoid of humanity. At 12:30, Henry went down to lunch at the building's executive restaurant. It was an elegant place, with well-spaced tables and a view of the city. As always, he sat alone at a table for 2. The waiter brought his usual order without him having to speak: grilled salmon, salad, sparkling water. Henry ate in silence, observing the other tables. Executives lunched in groups and discussing business or laughing at jokes. There was movement, energy, life. But no one approached Henry's table. No one invited him to join them. He was feared, respected, but not welcome. When was the last time someone had invited him to lunch for pleasure? Not out of obligation. He couldn't remember. Henry returned to the office and spent the afternoon reviewing reports, approving budgets, making decisions that would affect hundreds of people. It was what he always did. It was what he did best. But now there was a difference. Now he could hear the silence in the hallways when he passed, the silence in the meeting room when he entered, the silence around his table in the restaurant, the silence in his life. At 6 in the evening, as the office began to empty, Henry stood watching from his window. He saw groups of employees leaving together, chatting animatedly, making plans for happy hour or the weekend. He saw families reuniting in the parking lot, children running to hug their parents arriving from work, and he stood there, alone in his 12th floor office, surrounded by all the symbols of his success. There were diplomas on the walls, from Stanford, summa cum laude, trophies from business awards he had won over the years, photos of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, a picture from Forbes magazine where he was featured on the list of most promising young entrepreneurs. Everything was there. All the achievements he had chased since he was 20, all the success he had imagined would make him happy, but he was completely alone. What was once comfort, the silence, the control, the respectful distance from others, now weighed on him like a lead cloak. Henry understood that he had built an empire, but in the process, he had completely isolated himself from the world. "Why do you live in such a big house, all alone?" Alice's question returned with full force. He lived alone because he had chosen work over relationships. He had chosen money over human connections. He had chosen success over life. Henry thought of the small table in the Miller's house, where 4 people squeezed together and laughed. He thought of the way Thomas had jumped into his arms, the way Alice trusted him completely, the way Clara had treated him like family. He compared that to his dining table for 12, where he always ate alone, to his 8 empty bedrooms, to his silent hallways. He had everything money could buy, but he had nothing that truly mattered. For the first time in years, Henry Sterling wondered if there was still time to change, if it was still possible to build a life that had human warmth beyond just financial success, if it was still possible to learn to live instead of just work. A 6-year-old's question had cracked something inside him, and now, sitting alone in his office as the sun set over the city, Henry understood that his entire life needed to be rethought. He had wasted so much time building a fortress around himself that he had forgotten how to be human. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to learn. Henry was in his home office when he heard desperate knocking on the door. It wasn't the soft chime of the doorbell he was used to. It was small, urgent punches, as if someone was trying to break down the door. He ran down the stairs and quickly opened the door. Alice was there, but it wasn't the Alice he knew. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe, her little face red and wet with tears. She was wearing the same clothes as the day before, but now they were wrinkled and dirty. "Alice." Henry knelt down immediately. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "We were evicted," she managed to say between sobs. "Mom tried, but it didn't work." Henry felt as if the floor had vanished from under his feet. The world started spinning around him. Evicted. The Miller family had been evicted. "Take a deep breath," Henry said, pulling Alice inside the house. "Can you tell me what happened?" Alice tried to calm down, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her t-shirt. "The man came early this morning. He said we had to leave. Mom cried a lot, but he wouldn't let us stay." Henry knelt in front of her, holding her small, cold hands. "Where are your mum and Thomas now?" "At the neighbor's house. Mrs. Gable let us stay there today, but she said it can't be for long." Alice started crying again. "Mom is so sad. She won't stop apologizing to us." Henry felt an anger he had never felt before. Not anger at a specific person, but anger at the situation, the injustice, the idea that a family like the Millers could be thrown out on the street. "Alice, listen to me," Henry said, his voice as firm as he could manage. "No one is going to be on the street. Do you understand? I'm going to fix this." "How?" she asked, her eyes big and full of hope. Henry didn't know how, but he knew he was going to fix it. This family had become a part of him. Not on paper, there were no documents or contracts connecting them, but in his heart, and he wasn't going to let them suffer anymore. "Come with me," Henry said, grabbing his car keys. "Let's go get your mom and Thomas." The neighbor's house was 2 streets down from the Miller's old house. It was small like all the others in the neighborhood, but well kept. Henry knocked on the door and waited. A woman in her 60s answered. She had kind eyes, but Henry saw worry in her expression. "You must be Mrs. Gable," Henry said. "I'm Henry Sterling. Alice told me what happened." "Oh, you're the Henry," Mrs. Gable said, offering a tired smile. "They're here. Please, come in." Henry followed Mrs. Gable into the small living room, where he found Clara sitting on an old sofa holding Thomas in her lap. Clara's eyes were red from crying, and Thomas looked confused and scared. "Henry," Clara said, standing up quickly. "What? Why are you—" "Alice told me," Henry said simply. "I came to help." Clara started crying again. "I'm so sorry. I tried to pay the rent, but with Thomas's medicine and the bills, I couldn't get it all together in time." Henry felt his chest tighten. Clara was apologizing as if it were her fault, that the world was unfair, that wages were low, that medicine was expensive. "You don't have to apologize for anything," Henry said. "Absolutely nothing." "But we have nowhere to go," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Mrs. Gable was very kind to let us stay here today, but she can't keep us, and I don't know where—" "I do," Henry interrupted. "You're going to stay in a new house, a good, safe house." Clara stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to rent a house for you." "A real house, where you can stay for as long as you need." "Henry, no." Clara shook her head. "We can't accept that. It's too much." "Why is it too much?" Henry asked. "You're my family now." The words came out before he could think about them. But as soon as he said them, Henry realized they were true. The Millers were his family, the only family he had. Thomas slid from his mother's lap and ran to Henry. "Are you going to give us a new house?" "I am," Henry said, picking the boy up. "A house with a yard for you to play in." "With a swing?" Thomas asked, his eyes shining. "With a swing," Henry promised. Henry spent the rest of the day on the phone. He called real estate agents, explained what he needed. A 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood, available immediately. He explained that money was no object, that he could pay in advance, that he just needed it to be fast. In 2 hours, he had 5 options to see. The third house they visited was perfect. It was on a quiet, tree-lined street with well-kept houses and children playing on the sidewalks. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a backyard with a large tree. "This one," Henry said to the agent. "How much is the rent?" $4,000 a month plus security deposit, the agent replied. Henry didn't even hesitate. "I want to rent it for 2 years, paid in advance. Mr. Sterling, that's almost $100,000. "I know how much it is," Henry said. "When can I bring the family?" Clara was silent throughout the entire visit. She walked through the rooms with an expression of someone who couldn't believe what she was seeing. The bedrooms were larger than the living room of her old house. The kitchen had an island in the middle and new appliances. The backyard had green grass and enough space for the children to run. "It's too big," Clara said finally. "It's the right size," Henry corrected. "You deserve space." Alice and Thomas ran through the backyard, shouting with joy. Alice climbed the tree. Thomas rolled on the grass. It was the first time Henry had seen them with real space to be children. "Can I have my own room?" Alice asked, running back to them. "You can," Henry said. "You and Thomas can have separate rooms if you want." "I want to stay near Alice," Thomas said quickly. "So that you can share the big room and use the other one to play," Henry suggested. The children's eyes widened as if he had offered them a castle. The next day, Henry went shopping. Not the expensive shopping he was used to. He went to simple, practical furniture stores that sold nice but not extravagant things. He bought twin beds for the children, a queen bed for Clara, a round dining table with 4 chairs, a comfortable but not luxurious sofa, basic appliances, everything a family needed to be happy. "Would you like the mahogany furniture?" the saleswoman asked. "We have a very nice executive line." "No," Henry said. "I want furniture a family can use without fear of ruining it. Furniture for living, not for admiring." When the furniture arrived and was assembled, Henry took the Millers to see the finished house. Clara entered slowly, touching everything carefully, as if afraid it would disappear. "I can't accept this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's already done," Henry said simply. "Oh, the house is yours." Thomas ran straight to the backyard. Henry followed him and saw the boy spinning with his arms outstretched, laughing loudly. "Is this our real house?" Thomas asked. "It is, forever." Henry looked at the 5-year-old boy who had spent his entire life without stability, without security, without knowing if he would have a roof over his head the next day. "Forever," Henry promised. Alice appeared at the back door, still exploring the house. "Henry, there's a bathtub," she shouted. "A real bathtub." Henry smiled. In the old house, they only had a small shower. A bathtub was a luxury. "You can take a bath in the tub whenever you want," Henry said. Alice ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for giving us a home." "Thank you for giving me a family," Henry replied, and realized he had never said anything so true. 2 weeks later, Henry was having coffee in the new house's kitchen when his phone rang. "Henry, it's Sandra," said the voice on the other end. Sandra was one of the few people Henry considered a friend, more of a business acquaintance who had become close over the years. "I remember you asked if I knew anyone who needed an employee." "I remember. My cousin's diner is looking for someone. It's daytime work, Monday to Friday, fixed salary with benefits. Are you still interested?" Henry smiled. "I am. It's for a very special friend. You can send her over tomorrow to talk. Tell her it's my recommendation." Henry hung up and went to find Clara. She was in the backyard, hanging clothes on the line Henry had had installed. "Clara," Henry called, "I have some news." She turned, pinning one of Thomas's shirts. "What is it?" "A friend of mine has a cousin who owns a diner. They're looking for an employee. Day job, fixed salary, benefits." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You did this for me." "I did it for us," Henry said. "For our family." Clara dropped the shirt she was holding and began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. "I won't have to work nights anymore," she asked. "Never again. You'll work during the day and come home every evening. You'll have dinner with the kids, help with homework, read bedtime stories." "Like a normal mum," Clara said softly. "Like the wonderful mum you've always been," Henry corrected. The first night Clara worked at the diner, Henry had dinner with them. They sat around the new round table, eating pasta with sauce that Clara had made. "How was work?" Alice asked her mum. "It was good," Clara said, smiling. "Everyone was really nice to me, and I'll get to be home with you guys every night." "And in the morning too?" Thomas asked. "And in the morning too." Henry watched the scene. A family having dinner together, talking about their day, making plans for the weekend. It was something so simple, so normal, but something the Millers had never had, and he had never had it either. For the first time in his life, Henry Sterling was sitting at a table where he truly belonged, where he was wanted not for what he could buy or the power he had, but simply for who he was. "Henry?" Alice said, interrupting his thoughts. "Now you have to come for dinner here all the time," she said seriously. "Family eats dinner together." Henry felt his chest tighten with emotion. "All the time, all the time," Thomas confirmed. "You're our dad now." Clara looked at Henry, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. Henry nodded slightly, giving permission for what he already knew was true. "He is," Clara said softly. "He's part of our family now." That night, Henry drove back to his mansion, but for the first time he didn't feel the weight of the silence when he walked in. He didn't feel the loneliness of the empty hallways, because now he had a place where he belonged, a table where he was expected, people who cared if he came home. For the first time in his life, Henry Sterling had emotional stability. Not the stability that came from money in the bank or secure investments, the stability that came from having people who loved him. And they finally had stability too. A safe home, a steady job, food on the table, the certainty that someone cared about them. It was a fair trade. They had given him a family, and he had given them security. But deep down, Henry knew he was the one who had gained the most in the exchange. It was a Sunday morning when Alice appeared at the mansion door with a folded piece of paper in her small hands. Henry was having coffee in the garden, enjoying the soft morning sun, when he heard the doorbell. "Hi," Alice said when he opened the door, smiling in that slightly shy way he knew so well. "Hi, little one. What a nice surprise." Henry bent down to her level. "Where are Thomas and your mum?" "They stayed home tidying up his room. He wants to paint the walls blue." Alice rocked on her heels, holding the folded paper. "But I wanted to give you something." "What is it?" Alice held out the paper to him. "I made a new drawing. It's special." Henry took the paper carefully. It was a standard sheet of notebook paper, folded in half. When he opened it, he saw a drawing made with colored crayons. 3 stick figures were holding hands in front of a house. The house had a red door, blue windows, and a bright yellow sun shining in the sky. There were colorful flowers in the garden, and a swing hanging from a tree. "It's beautiful," Henry said, studying every detail. Alice had taken great care with the drawing. The figures had smiling faces, and one of them was clearly taller than the other 2. "Turn it over," Alice said, biting her lower lip. Henry turned the paper over. On the back, written in large, slightly crooked letters, was a sentence: "Family is who doesn't leave." Henry read the words once, twice, 3 times. He felt something tighten in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Who are these people?" Henry asked, looking at the drawing again. Alice came closer and pointed to each figure. This one is Mommy," she said, pointing to the middle figure. "This is Thomas." She pointed to the smallest one. "And this one," she paused, looking at Henry with those big, serious eyes, "is you." Henry felt as if the world had stopped. He looked at the drawing again, at the tallest figure that Alice had identified as him. It was holding hands with the other 2, smiling, part of the stick figure family she had created. "Me?" Henry asked, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "Yeah." Alice spoke with the naturalness of a 6-year-old who was just stating an obvious fact. "Mommy, Thomas." "And you?" Henry held the paper with both hands, as if it were something fragile that could break. It was just a simple drawing, made by a child with cheap crayons, but it felt like the most important thing he had ever owned. "Can I come in?" Alice asked. "I want to tell you about the drawing." "Of course." They sat in the living room, Alice in her favorite armchair and Henry on the sofa, still holding the drawing. "Why did you write that on the back?" Henry asked, touching the written words. "Because it's true," Alice said simply. "My old school teacher always said that family isn't just who you're born with. It's who stays with you, even when things get hard." Henry looked at the 6-year-old girl who spoke about family with more wisdom than most adults he knew. "And you think I stay?" "You stayed," Alice said, swinging her little legs. "When we were evicted, you didn't leave. When Thomas got sick, you helped. When Mum was sad, you made her smile again." Henry felt his eyes burn. "And that makes me family." "Of course. Family is who shows up when you need them, who cares when you're sad, who's happy when you're happy." Alice spoke as if she were explaining something very simple. "You do all of that." Henry looked at the drawing again. The house Alice had drawn looked cheerful, welcoming. The 3 figures holding hands seemed to belong to each other, and she had included him there, naturally, as if it had always been obvious that he was a part of it. "You know what else?" Alice continued, sliding from the armchair to sit on the floor near Henry. "Guys, Mom said something yesterday." "What did she say?" "That before you came, she was afraid we'd never have a real family, just the 3 of us, always running, always scared." Alice took a crayon from her pocket and began to draw in the air. "But now we have a big family." "Big how?" "There's Mom, me, Thomas, and you. And there's also Rosie," she added, referring to her rag doll. "Family can be as big as we want it to be." Henry thought of his own childhood. He had grown up in a family that existed only on paper, parents who were always traveling, who spoke to him only about school grades and future plans. He had never truly felt that he belonged to anything. But now, looking at Alice's drawing, he understood what he had been missing his whole life. Family wasn't about DNA or last names or inheritances. It was about choosing to stay, about caring, about showing up when you were needed. "Can I ask you a question?" Henry said. "You can. How did you know I wanted to be part of your family?" Alice tilted her head to the side. "I'm thinking, you always looked like you were searching for something. And after we met, you stopped looking like that." "Like what?" "Like you were lost, like you were lonely." Alice got up and went to the window. "Now you look like you found what you were looking for." Henry followed her gaze. Outside, the perfect garden stretched under the morning sun, but now he could imagine Thomas running on the grass, Alice having a picnic under the tree, Clara reading a book in a chair in the shade. He could imagine real life happening in that space that had always been merely decorative. "Alice," Henry said, "can I tell you a secret?" "You can. I never had a real family before you guys." Alice turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Never. Never. My parents, they were very busy. They didn't have time to be a family." "That's sad," Alice said with the simple compassion of small children. "But now you have us." "I do. Of course. Forever and ever." Henry looked at the drawing again. It was crude, made with the limited technique of a 6-year-old. The proportions were wrong. The colors went outside the lines. The figures were basic. But it was perfect. It was the visual representation of something he had searched for his whole life without knowing it, a place where he belonged. People who wanted him there, not for what he could do or buy, but simply for who he was. "Can I hang this drawing on the refrigerator?" Henry asked. "You can, but—" Alice hesitated. "Wouldn't it be better to hang it on the fridge at our house, so everyone can see it?" Our house, Alice had said our house, referring to the house where she, Clara, and Thomas lived. The house Henry had rented for them, but that Alice now considered his as well. "That's a good idea," Henry said. "Should we go there now?" "Let's go." Alice took his hand, small and warm, and they left the mansion together. On the way, she chatted about her plans to paint Thomas's room, about the new book her mum had bought her, about how she had taught Thomas to make bracelets with string. Henry listened to every word, but part of his mind was still processing the drawing he carried in his pocket. It was funny how a piece of paper could change everything. Or maybe it didn't change anything. Maybe it just made visible something that already existed. When they arrived at the house, Thomas ran to meet them at the door. "Henry, you came to see my room?" "I did. Alice brought me to see it." Clara appeared in the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. When she saw Henry, she smiled, a warm smile he had learned to associate with home. "What a nice surprise," she said. "Want some coffee?" "I would, but first—" Henry took the drawing out of his pocket. Alice made something special. He showed the drawing to Clara, who studied it carefully. When she turned it over and read the words on the back, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Alice," she said, hugging her daughter. "How beautiful." "Can I stick it on the fridge?" Alice asked. "Of course you can." They went to the kitchen, and Alice taped the drawing to the refrigerator door with a piece of tape. It was at her eye level, but from where Henry stood, he could see it perfectly. "Now everyone who comes here will know we're a family," Alice said, satisfied. Henry looked at the drawing on the fridge. Next to it were other drawings by Alice and Thomas, family photos, a shopping list written in Clara's careful handwriting. It was a gallery of daily life, of the simple things that make a house a home. And now he was part of it. He was literally represented there, holding hands with the people he had learned to love. "Family is who doesn't leave," Henry repeated the words from the drawing. "Yeah," Alice confirmed. "And you're not going to leave, right?" Henry looked around the kitchen, Clara preparing coffee, Thomas playing with cars on the floor, Alice organizing her crayons in a box. It was chaotic, noisy, imperfect. It was exactly where he wanted to be. "Never," Henry promised. "I'm never leaving." And for the first time in his life, when he made that promise, Henry Sterling knew he would be able to keep it, because he had finally found the missing piece of his story, a family that wanted him there, not in spite of who he was, but exactly because of it. Alice's drawing wasn't just paper and crayon, it was a map home, and Henry had finally arrived where he belonged. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows on a lazy Sunday morning. Clara was at the counter making coffee, still in her pajamas and slippers, her hair in a messy bun. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the soft sound of the radio, playing in the background. Alice was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by paper and crayons, concentrating on a new drawing. Her tongue was sticking out, as it always did when she was focused, and 2 colorful sheets were already spread out around her. Thomas was running around the backyard, chasing a butterfly with a glass jar in his hands. His shouts of joy came through the open door that Clara had left to let the fresh air in. It was a perfectly ordinary scene, a family on a Sunday morning, unhurried, just existing together in the slow rhythm of the weekend. When the doorbell rang, Clara looked up from the coffee. "That must be Henry," she said to Alice. "Already?" Alice asked, without looking up from her drawing. "He said he wanted to have breakfast with us today." Clara opened the door and found Henry standing on the porch, holding a paper bag that smelled of fresh bread. He was dressed more casually than usual, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, but there was something different about his face, a lightness that wasn't there before. "Good morning," Henry said, smiling. "I brought bread from the bakery." "How lovely. Come in, the coffee is almost ready." Henry came in and went to greet Alice, who finally looked up from her drawing. "Hi, Henry, look what I'm making." She showed him the paper where she was drawing a family of cats. There was one big cat, one medium-sized, and two small ones, all colorful. "It's our family," Alice explained. "Except we're cats." "Why cats?" Henry asked, sitting on the floor beside her. "Because cats always stick together, and they purr when they're happy." Thomas ran in from the back door, sweaty and smiling. "Henry, you're here early," he shouted, jumping into Henry's arms. "I am. I brought fresh bread for breakfast." "What kind?" "French and sweet, one of each." Thomas clapped his hands. "Can I have the sweet one?" "You can, but after you eat something proper," Clara said from the kitchen, laughing. They gathered around the round kitchen table. Clara poured coffee for herself and Henry, milk for the children. Henry opened the bag and took out the loaves of bread, still warm and fragrant. "This one is French," he said, breaking off a piece of the crusty bread. "And this one is sweet, with raisins." Thomas grabbed a piece of the sweet bread and took a bite with his eyes closed, as if savoring something extraordinary. "This is the best bread in the world," Thomas replied with his mouth full. Clara served homemade jam she had made the week before. Alice spread butter on her bread. Thomas ate 2 slices of the sweet bread before anyone could stop him. There was no rush, no agenda, just 4 people around a table, eating fresh bread on a Sunday morning. "Do you know what we're going to do today?" Clara asked. "What?" Thomas asked, excited. "Nothing," Clara replied, smiling. "Absolutely nothing important." Henry laughed. "Sounds perfect. Can we watch cartoons?" Alice asked. "We can. And then you can play in the yard, and maybe in the afternoon we'll make popcorn." "And you're staying, Henry?" Thomas asked. Henry looked around the table. Clara was disheveled and in her pajamas, but she looked more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen at social events. Thomas had jam stuck to his face and was smiling as if he were the happiest boy in the world. Alice was swinging her legs in her chair and planning out loud all the drawings she was going to make. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was completely ordinary. It was the most precious thing Henry had ever experienced. "I'm staying," Henry said, "if you'll have me." "Of course we'll have you," Alice said. "You live here now." "I do. Not for sleeping, but in your heart. Your heart lives here." Henry felt something stir in his chest, an emotion so intense it almost hurt. After breakfast, they spread out through the house. Thomas went back to the yard, now trying to teach the butterfly to land on his finger. Alice settled on the living room floor with her drawings. Clara washed the dishes, humming softly. Henry sat on the sofa and watched. Nothing extraordinary was happening. No major achievement, no world-changing decision, no business deal being closed. Just life happening. A child playing in the yard, another drawing on the floor, a mother taking care of the house. Simple sounds, everyday movements, moments that wouldn't make any newspaper. But there was something there that Henry had been searching for his whole life without knowing what it was. Presence, not grandeur, not impressive achievements or expensive acquisitions, just the solid feeling of being exactly where he should be, with the right people, at the right time. Henry thought of his mansion, with its empty rooms and silent hallways. He thought of his office, where employees avoided him and he ate lunch alone. He thought of all the important meetings, all the million-dollar contracts, all the awards he had won. He had spent decades building an empire, accumulating wealth, chasing what he thought was success. He had worked 16 hours a day, sacrificed relationships, ignored his own humanity. But what really mattered was happening right now, in this small living room, with a 6-year-old girl drawing cats on the floor and a 5-year-old boy trying to make friends with a butterfly. What he had sought in fortunes, he found in a small gesture, the gesture of a child mowing a lawn to buy medicine for her brother, the gesture of a mother offering homemade cookies as a thank you, the gesture of including him in a family drawing, naturally, as if it had always been obvious that he belonged there. Henry closed his eyes and listened to the sounds around him. Thomas laughing in the yard, Alice talking to herself while she drew, Clara humming in the kitchen. The sound of real life, simple and imperfect and absolutely perfect. When he opened his eyes, Alice was in front of him, holding out a new drawing. "For you," she said. It was a simple drawing, a house with 4 windows and a red door. In front, 4 stick figures were smiling. Underneath, in large letters, Alice had written, "Home is where the family is." Henry took the drawing and felt his eyes burn. "Thank you, Alice." "You're welcome. It's true, isn't it? Home is where the family is." Henry looked around once more. The small living room with simple furniture, the kitchen where breadcrumbs still lingered on the table, the yard where Thomas continued his mission with the butterfly. It wasn't his house on paper. It wasn't his name on the deed. But Alice was right. Home was where the family was, and his family was here. Henry Sterling had found what he was looking for, not in a boardroom or a bank account, but on an ordinary Sunday morning, around a small table, eating fresh bread with the people who loved him. It was as simple as that, and it was everything. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.